Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Richard, and for those that have subscribed, many thanks. For those that are unsubscribed, please do subscribe. I'm asking you desperately to subscribe. There's lots of stuff coming in 2025, but today we're going to be talking about something the other side of me, which is in the past aviation and also DEI. If you don't know what DEI stands for, it's diversity, equity and inclusion. And today's lecture, and could it be called a lecture, is about more the inclusion side and where mistakes may have gone in employing a particular person that wasn't medically fit to do the role, which is really, really sad. Here we go, people are looking at me. People are looking at me, they're driving past wondering what this guy's doing, recording himself with a camera. Let's give him a wave. No, she's looking at me. Let's get on with the lecture. So, as you can see before we start, I'm on my Triumph 400X Scrambler. Fantastic machine. I've seen them advertised now for £5,500. I'm assuming brand new. That price does not include the on-the-road price to get it registered and things like that. But they are a fantastic machine. I believe Triumph have sold some 60,000, maybe even more by now, and it's only been out a year. And you know, 60,000, maybe 60,000, that includes the Speed 400 as well. It might do, I don't know. We're talking about a very, very sad situation. I've been keeping a track on this situation for a couple of years about a young lady over in America who got killed. That was the ground crew or the ramp crew or whatever you call it in America. A couple of years ago, having been sucked up into one of the engines of an aircraft, a gas turbine engine, a turbine engine. Here we go. There's a train. Actually, just before I started recording, a train came past, and he was flying. It was like a GSXR 1000. He was flying, and he beeped his horn and was waving at me. He went past me at 130 mile an hour. Unbelievable. I waved back at him. I don't know if he saw me. But anyway, that's besides the point. So this is not a bad recording place, actually. Get the train drivers sticking the thumbs up and waving. But anyway, serious note. So a young lady, age 34, mother of 3, got sucked up into a turbine engine of a commercial aircraft. And the reason for that was that the APU, or auxiliary power unit, which is in the tail of most aircraft, was not working for this particular aeroplane. But we're going to talk about that while I ride. But going back to the 400, this is a great bike for 2025. If you're already riding and you've already got a bike, go and tell your mates to go and get the test passed and go and buy something like this. Go and get them riding motorcycles, for the love of God. Let's get on with this, yeah? So let's go for a ride, and we'll talk about the story of this young lady and what happened to me on a RyanAir flight a few days ago where the APU failed, the auxiliary power unit. And not many people know this. When you catch an aeroplane and you see an engine on each wing or 2 engines on each wing, that's not all the engines that they have. They have an additional engine in the tail. And I'll also tell you why you never see 3-engined aircraft anymore, where one of the engines is in the big engine is in the tail. Yeah, we'll talk about that if I can remember to tell you. And we're talking about cognitive impairment. That's the point here, cognitive impairment, and it also applies to motorcycles. And by the way, if you think motorcycles are dangerous, from my perspective, aeroplanes, helicopters are much more dangerous, even when they're not running, when they just stood still. I remember when my eldest boy was a little kid. My eldest boy is about 29 now. And he was a little kid, and we were on the air side of this particular field, and he walked up to, what, if I can remember right, I think it was a Piper PA-28, and I was about 20 meters away from him, and he reached up to the propeller, and I remember shouting across the field, I remember shouting, "Don't touch that aeroplane!" And he went, "Oh!" I don't usually swear. Yes, I don't usually swear, but it certainly got his attention. Never touch an aeroplane or a helicopter, even if it's shut down. Don't touch it. They're the most dangerous things going. Anyway, much more dangerous than motorcycles. Let's go for a ride. Let's take it from there. Wow, it's chilly. It really is chilly. Oh, what I do for you. Don't forget to give it a like if you enjoy the content of this video and you find it informative. Where shall we go? Where should we go? Let's take a right. Let's take a right. Here in Staffordshire. Right. Cognitive impairment. So, that's when the brain function doesn't work and the nerves and the electricity and things like that that goes up to the brain in its simplest form may well give you messages that are incorrect, and the decisions you make based on that information may be poor decisions. And we all suffer from it at some point, when we're having a beer, when we're having wine, if we're having a cigarette. That changes the perception of your brain. If you take drugs, and medical drugs as well, you may suffer from cognitive impairment. So, a couple of years ago, one of the ground crew, or the ramp crew, as it was over in America, was working in readiness for an aircraft to come and land. So there's a couple of stories here. One, when the APU failed on the RyanAir airplane that I was on a couple of days ago, and this particular story that was based over in America. Now, let's talk about the story that was based in America. When an aeroplane comes into an airport, a commercial aeroplane comes into an airport, any issues with the aeroplane are notified to the ramp crew or ground crew. These are the people that put the ribbons around the aeroplane and bring up the stairs or bring down the jet bridge to the aircraft. Okay? They're the ground crew. They look after everything that the aeroplane and the passengers need. Amongst the air crew that are in the aeroplane as well. Yeah, but they help deal with the aircraft and make sure everything is as safe as it can be. So, on this particular occasion, an aircraft landed at an American airfield, and this is not about America, it's just a situation. And the it was known that the APU, the auxiliary power unit, which is in the tail, a little gas turbine engine that provides air and electricity to the aircraft, had failed. Now, so they couldn't start it up. So to make sure that electricity and air was made available to the aircraft, the airport was told that number one engine, the one on port side, on the left-hand side, because it was only a two-engine aircraft, would remain on until the jet bridge had been connected, and the electrics from the jet bridge onto the aeroplane could then allow the engines, be that number one engine or the APU, to be shut down. Okay, now normally the APU continues running regardless of the jet bridge being connected or not, as a backup just in case the jet bridge fails from an electrical perspective. Okay, so you usually have an APU that's running. So in this occasion, the APU was known to not be working on this aircraft, and regarding what's called minimums, this is allowed on this particular aeroplane in this particular area of the world. This was allowed, and this is normal. When you land an aeroplane at Manchester Airport or Houston or Heathrow, we have what's known as minimums, and you must comply as an aeroplane to the minimums of what the airfield that you're landing at expect. There are minimums that are binary. It must be either working or it is not. Yeah, and if it is not, you can't land there. Then there are the other minimums which have a time delay on them, and the APU in this instance has a time delay. So it must be fixed within, let's say, 3 days, or 5 days, or 10 days, yeah? And you have a number of days as a carrier to get that particular issue resolved on the aeroplane. And in this case, it was the APU which had a number of days for it to be resolved. I'm just setting the scene here so you understand. So what we have is an aircraft that's coming in. It meets the minimums of the airfield to which it's landing. The ground crew are expecting engine number one to remain running at idle, this turbine engine to remain running at idle after it's landed and come up to the jet bridge. When the jet bridge is going to be connected, then all the electrics come through the jet bridge into the aeroplane, which allows the electricity in the aeroplane and the compressed air in the aeroplane to be supplied from the electricity in the jet bridge. That means that the APU, or in this case engine number one, can be shut down. In this instance, the ground crew had been notified that engine number one would be running. Unfortunately, the young lady of 34 at the time, I understand, with 3 children, was suffering from multiple sclerosis, varying degrees of that, and after a toxicology report, after her death, there may have been marijuana within her blood. There is a point here, there is a point. So, the first question is, here we go, the first question is, should ground staff have medicals like pilots and aircrew? In the UK, they do have medicals. And ramp agents, as they're known, do have medicals in this particular area of America, and I'll put a link to a more detailed video on it, because it is interesting. They didn't require medicals for the ground staff. I am assuming, although it's been denied, that someone in the organisation to which this lady was employed would have known that she was suffering from multiple sclerosis. And that's the first red flag. And I'm surprised, and this is where the diversity, equity and inclusion comes in. I am surprised that someone didn't know about this, and if they did know about this, was it DEI, the inclusion bit, that sort of encouraged to bring her into the role of ramp staff? And through that decision, it's brought an end to her life. What did end her life is she was informed that number one engine would be running on idle, and let's understand it, when number one engine's running on idle, it's sucking more air than you could ever imagine. It sucks so much air on idle. And unfortunately, this young lady, 34, 3 children at the time, was sucked up into the aircraft engine, feet first, thrown around in the engine, and then she was spat out forwards back onto the ground to where ultimately she was found dead. I don't want to go into the details of that. So the point here is, through cognitive impairment, she possibly misinterpreted the messages issued prior to the aeroplane landing and the situation of the aeroplane and the risks associated to the aeroplane whilst working around the perimeter of that aeroplane. So the first question is, should she have had a medical? Should all people have a medical? Yes, they should. Yes, they should. Should people with multiple sclerosis be associated to managing aircraft? Probably not. And that's where the inclusion comes in. Probably not. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. I'm assuming, and I am not a specialist in medical multiple sclerosis, I am assuming there are varying degrees of multiple sclerosis. Let's take a left here. See what's down here. I'm assuming that is the case. But the risks associated to that, whether having multiple sclerosis or not, must be considered. Now I'm assuming that the ramp staff over in America is a fairly good job. Yeah, this must be reasonably well paid. If average pay, possibly more than average pay. Wow, look at that house. That's having a lot of work done to it. Wow. So, it's a very, very sad thing. This young lady has been killed, and her 3 children are now motherless. It's super sad, super sad. I've got to admit this, it's a lovely area, Staffordshire. Look at these for houses. Just look at this. Why are you living in London? Jesus Christ. Just look at these for properties. Beautiful. Beautiful properties. Of course, there aren't many Chinese takeaways around here. Anyway. What do you think? What do you think? So that's the first part. Very, very sad story. Young lady dies getting sucked up into a turbine engine. Number 1 engine, that's the one on the port side. Port side, that's the left-hand side of the aircraft as you sat in the aircraft. Starboard is the right side. So, this goes on to the second part. I've recently come back from Morocco, as some of you already know, and just landed at Manchester Airport. In fact, let me just take a step back. I fly on lots of Eastern-based aircraft, or certainly did in the past, the recent past, within the last, let's say, 9 years, 10 years, let's say 10 years. And I've always found it very strange that when you just touch down and the nose wheel just touches the ground, all these people on these Eastern airlines start unbuckling themselves, and as it slows down to a reasonable speed, they all start standing up and start moving around. And I find it bizarre that they're doing this. I find it incredibly bizarre and incredibly dangerous. It always seemed to be on Eastern Airlines. It didn't matter how much you shouted at these passengers, they just ignored you. They were getting the baggage out of the overhead lockers and everything. Unbelievable. That problem is now coming over to the UK, or should I say the Western world. I'm assuming it's happening in America, but it's certainly coming over to the UK. On this occasion, when we landed at Manchester Airport, this was the scenario. The aircraft had just touched down, everything was fine, taxiing over to the apron or the ramp, and as it was taxiing, and the APU would have been started. Yep, the APU doesn't run constantly. Yes, you only start up the APU, auxiliary power unit, when you land, in readiness for when you're shutting your engines down. Anyway, the pilot starts taxiing away towards the designated gate, and as he pulls up to the gate, bearing in mind all seatbelt signs are on and you shouldn't be getting out of your seat, as he pulls up to the gate, everybody starts, all these people start to unbuckle and blah blah blah, and then the lighting fails in the aircraft. Bearing in mind the main engines are still running, and obviously the APU had stalled. It had done a blowout or whatever, because it's a little gas turbine engine. It's in the tail. It's in the tail of the aircraft. When you're looking at your aeroplane in gate number 37 of Terminal 2 at Manchester Airport or whatever, you can always see a heat gas coming out of the tail. Have a look at it next time. That gas, that heat gas, is from the APU motor that's feeding the aircraft with electricity and air pressure. Yeah? Alright, there we go. Have a look next time. So when you think this aeroplane only has 2 engines or 4 engines, it's actually got another engine for the APU in the tail. And the APU, in this occasion, failed. It shut down or stalled. And everybody's getting up, all the lights shut down. They have to keep engine number 1 running to ensure electricity and air is supplied to the aircraft. And now they're waiting for the jet bridge to connect to the aircraft, to then pass power from the jet bridge into the aircraft, allowing engine number 1, in this case at RyanAir, to be shut down to then allow a safe position to tell the passengers that they can take the seatbelt off and start grabbing the baggage in the overhead lockers, etc., etc. Unbelievable. We've got passengers that are jumping around in the dark in the cabin, and it's like, and the staff and that are shouting at them to sit down and put the seatbelt on, and nobody gives a damn. Nobody gives a flying shit. A flying turd. Everybody just ignores it, and it's just interesting what demographic this is that ignores it. Let me just slow down. That's it, out of the water. And I just thought I'd tell you that. Final thought. I said to you, why don't we see many aeroplanes anymore like the TriStar? Is it the TriStar that had 3 engines? It had one on each wing and a main engine in the tail. There was a time, I hope you're enjoying this lecture, there was a time that transversing the Atlantic, the rules were that you could not go across the Atlantic with 2 engines. You had to have more than 2 engines, and that's where the things like the Boeing 747 came out with 4 engines. Not a problem. But to get over this, some of the 2-engined aeroplanes like the 737 and things like that, I'm not saying it was the 737, but I'm using that as an example because that has 2 engines. What they did was that to get over that policy, they ended up sticking another engine in the tail. So they had 3 engines. And this doesn't include the APU. That's a separate matter. Completely separate matter. So they had 3 engines. So you used to see aeroplanes with an engine on each wing and a big engine on the tail. And that allowed those aeroplanes to transverse over the Atlantic. They had more than 2 engines. Of course, things have moved on. Things have moved on now with more reliable engines and things like that. So there's another bit of information for you. And I'll give you a bonus. A Brucey bonus. And if you've got this far, don't forget to comment on this Brucey bonus and if you knew about this or not. In the early parts of commercial and passenger aviation, and bearing in mind if I'd got my time again, I would have probably, from a flying perspective, I would have gone into air crash investigation. I think I would have done that. This is about crashes. Here's the Brucey bonus. In the early part of commercial flights for passengers, the understanding of jet streams was not well known, and subsequently they used to navigate by seat of the pants and all that kind of thing. What are you doing? You just stood there in the road. They used to navigate by the seat of the pants and maps and understanding the speed, airspeed and ground speed and all that kind of rubbish, but they didn't understand the impact of what was jet streams, and subsequently they'd either overshoot, because they were in a jet stream, they'd overshoot the airfield and come down, or undershoot the airfield and not realise where they were. And subsequently, aircraft had accidents through lack of fuel and all that kind of rubbish. But at one point, they couldn't understand, and here's the point here, they couldn't understand why in some air crashes, the passengers were naked. But in other crashes, the passengers had got the clothes on. This sounds really, really strange, and I know you're thinking, Richard, where the hell are you going with this? But this is important. This is important. Now, after a number of incidents of air crashes where most of the passengers were found naked, and in other instances of air crashes where passengers were found clothed, they realised that the aircraft where passengers were clothed had actually broke up when it hit the ground. For those that were naked, the aircraft broke up mid-air. And because a 400-500 mile an hour wind hits a human body, it absolutely rips off your clothes. It just whips it straight off. Did you know that? And that's where they started understanding the relationship of aircraft that had broke up in flight and aircraft that had crashed by hitting the ground. Did you know that? Tell me in the comments below. I hope you found this information useful. Don't forget to ride safely and be kind to everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. 2025 is going to be a fantastic year for you, for me, and the channel. I'll see you very, very soon. Have a great one. Hope you enjoyed this. Thank you. Bye-bye.